So how will the Paladin look in Phase 4 for Season of Discovery? The PTR has been out for a good few days now, and there's been a ton of changes for every class in spec, but none have received as many changes as the Paladin, which has pretty much got an entire rework for every spec that it has. So let's dive into the changes, my thoughts on the changes, and what to expect from the Paladin in Phase 4 with what we know from the PTR. And a quick note before we dive in, this is just the first round of PTR testing, and some parts could change, but the majority of it will stand, as I highly doubt there's magically going to be another massive overhaul for the class. As we know, every class is getting 3 new runes to the cloak slot. So the first rune we have is Shield of Righteousness, which slams the target with your shield, causing holy damage based on your block value for a 6-second cooldown. It's essentially just the warrior version of Shield Slam, a nice filler ability for Paladin tanks. The second rune we get for the Paladin is Vindicator. When your Vindication talent is triggered, it also decreases the target's attack power by 70 per talent point and increases your strength, agility and attack power by 5% per talent point. Vindication duration is increased to 30 seconds. Now to be honest with you, this rune is actually pretty good. The only problem I've got is that it competes directly with another rune and the third rune that they've released, which is Righteous Vengeance. When your Judgment, Crusader Strike, Divine Storm or Holy Shock abilities critically strike, your target would take 30% additional damage of that damage over 8 seconds, like a bleed ability, like Warrior Deep Wounds type thing. So you basically have the 2 runes that are really good and you want to take both. So maybe they will be situationally better in different scenarios. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe a tank actually takes Vindicator for the attack power debuff. It really depends whether it affects bosses properly or not. This is only a PTR, so we're not entirely sure. We'll have to wait and see how good these runes are. So after doing a bit more testing, the Vindicator rune definitely comes out on top for now, and that's what I've been hearing a lot from the Paladins as well, and the Paladins that I've spoken to and I've been seeing about in the Paladin Discord. But there is one thing to note, is that Righteous Vengeance will scale very well with crit, just like it did in Wrath of the Lich King when it was a 2-set bonus in TOGC. So honestly, even though Vindicator right now is pulling quite ahead, it's really going to be kind of unknown until we really get our hands on the second round of PTR testing and we can actually use like world buffs. And even then, we're not actually going to be in Bisque gear, and the more gear that you have, the better Righteous Vengeance will actually be. So it's just a bit of, we're going to have to wait and see with this one basically. So now with the new cloak runes out the way, let's talk about some of the other adjustments that we'll be getting. Seal of Martyrdom is no longer a rune ability, but is now loaned as a baseline ability from a skill book. To be honest with you, this one was a long time coming. It kind of felt this way ever since Phase 1, when you had to compete with Seal of Martyrdom and Divine Storm in the same slot. And the big problem that Paladin really have in Season of Discovery is that they needed this rework very early on. Now let me explain why and let me explain what I mean. So a lot of classes that were already fully fleshed out from Classic, for example the Warrior, the Mage, the Hunter to some extent, the Warlock, etc. Like there was all decent or very good in DPS, in PvE, PvP, whatever way you want to look at it. But the problem with Paladin is it had so many things fundamentally wrong with it that needed fixing before the runes were even placed on top, because the way you can look at it is the Paladin gets runes and that just puts them at the same bracket as, let's say, a Warrior without runes. But now a Warrior is going to get runes on top of that, which kind of further increases that gap. So Paladin was essentially so broken, he needed so much help. The only spec that realistically could have survived was Holy, but even then Holy got done so dirty and they've only just managed to actually get a bit of love in Phase 4 coming up. But we'll touch a little bit more on some of those points when we come to them about how the Holy have received a bit of love. So the mana return granted by Seal of Martyrdom is now based on 65% of the damage the Paladin takes from the seal, down from 133%. We was told in last phase that mana return was going to be nerfed for the Horde and the Alliance, and this is definitely noticeable on the PTR, but I will say one thing, I've not been in a proper raid setup yet with proper mana management, so it could be a lot better than what I've been experiencing on the PTR. I don't think it's as drastic, and I think it will be actually pretty decent in a raid scenario, and I think overall it's probably a pretty good change. Although at the time it feels amazing to, you know, be able to just spam buttons and do this and do that and not have to worry about mana. It kind of takes out a little bit of nuance in the game where you do actually have to manage your mana a little bit. And you know, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Do you think the reduction in mana return for the Horde and the Alliance as well, respectively with Shamans, is good or bad? A new rune has been added in place of Seal of Martyrdom called Divine Light, a powerful expensive heal that causes 50% of any excess healing from Divine Light to be converted into an Absorb Shield for 15 seconds. The Absorb Shield does not accumulate from multiple casts. Divine Light benefits from most talents and abilities that affect Holy Light. Finally, Holy Paladin is actually getting some love for once, which is amazing to see. And there's more adjustments to this rune as well that isn't currently live on the PTR, but it is said to be live very soon. Is that this rune is actually being moved to the back slot. Unsure if that means one of the back slots is going to be moved onto the chest slot yet, but it does mean that the Holy Paladin will have a usable cloak slot. Another great change that is coming for this rune that isn't quite live on the PTR just yet is the additional damage shield from Divine Light over healing will now also apply to the Beacon of Light targets. Now, I've got to be honest, I'm no Holy Paladin. I don't know how much this spell is going to be used, as I do think it's quite mana intensive, but one thing I will say is it could probably be used as a cooldown if the tank is expected to take a lot of damage, or the tanks, plural, because Beacon of Light. So, you know, maybe you can throw out a massive heal when the tanks are at 100% if there's a lot of tank damage expected to come out, so you can give them a massive shield before that happens. Exorcist is no longer a rune ability, but is now learned as a baseline ability from a skill book. Honestly, should have been like this from the start. A new rune has been added in place of Exorcist, called Aura Mastery. Doubles the magnitude of the Paladin's current aura for 6 seconds. Aura Mastery is not affected by the global cooldown. Yeah, I mean, Aura Mastery, it's a bit boring to be honest. It's okay to have, it's going to be good for, you know, Molten Core and all the resistances and all that kind of thing. And I guess for the very first time for a Retribution Paladin or a tank, it can actually be used as sort of like a offensive cooldown, because it should work on Sanctity Aura, meaning you'll get 20% increased holy damage for those 6 seconds as opposed to 10%, so maybe this is where you can use it and pop wings. And, you know, it's the first time it's actually going to be sort of a combination, because Aura Mastery came out in Wrath of the Lich King, and similarly in Wrath of the Lich King is where Sanctity Aura got moved to a passive talent rather than an aura. Beacon of Light duration is now 1 hour. I'm not really sure how much this is going to change. If you're a main tank only healer, I suppose this is pretty good because you're never going to have to swap the beacon around. Sheath of Light no longer grants bonus healing. The bonus healing effect from critical heals was moved from Sheath of Light rune to the Fanaticism rune. Honestly, this isn't really that big. If you're doing solo content, chances are you're going to be taking Fanaticism anyway because it's such a great rune for solo content. As a retri or a prot, it doesn't really make that much difference in terms of PvE side of it. Probably helps a little bit in dungeons and that kind of thing. For a healer, it's pretty nice actually to be able to have it on the Fanaticism rune. Now here's a big one. The damage done by Hammer of the Righteous is reduced by 50%, but the threat was increased by 100% to compensate. So in terms of threat for tanks, it literally says it right there, it will not change at all in terms of threat. The compensation directly outweighs the damage reduction. Now I completely understand why this change has been made because of a few reasons. Tanks were doing way too much damage, Paladin tanks were, in terms of relative DPS to the entire raid. And also it was really strong in PvP, especially in a group setting. If you go and get 5 Paladins with this on and you just run into a group of enemies, you're just like one-shot them all, sounding like a church, like someone just got married. One of the best sounding abilities in the game, by the way. So I can see why it's been changed, but honestly it feels like a, you know, you've had some fun and now we're taking the fun away from you type thing. Another thing is that Retribution Paladin really don't have a lot of cleave, and this is kind of like the go-to cleave option for Rep Paladins, even to put on a one-hander and shield and, you know, go hit some Hammer of the Righteousness. So it kind of sucks to lose that as well, because it's not exactly like Retribution Paladin is very strong on single target. And also it was very good for solo playing. A lot of the solo things that I done, it contributed to a lot of your damage. It made some of the solo stuff possible to be able to use Hammer of the Righteous. So it kind of sucks that it's been nerfed, but at the same time I do agree that tanks shouldn't realistically be out DPS in actual DPS classes, so it's fair enough. Infusion of Light has seen several adjustments. Infusion of Light now increases damage and healing of Holy Shock by 50%, up from 20% and previously was only healing. Infusion of Light now reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock to only 6 seconds. Infusion of Light no longer resets the Exorcism cooldown. I'm going to be for real, right, and I'm sorry to the 2 or 3 people that like to play Holy Shock Paladin. I honestly couldn't give a fuck about Shockadin. I wish they'd put their effort into, you know, proper retri stuff or proper tank stuff, proper healing stuff. Art of War has seen several adjustments. Art of War now only applies cooldown reduction and mana cost reduction to Exorcism. Art of War now reduces the remaining cooldown of Exorcism by 1 second for each critical hit rather than fully resetting the cooldown. This is a big nerf to the Paladin's damage, and to be honest with you, it probably is justified in terms of getting rid of the Exorcism playstyle, but there is one big problem with this. The first is that it literally kills the playstyle, so the people who liked the playstyle no longer gets to play the playstyle. And the second problem is so much power was taken out of the Paladin kit and not really properly replaced. I mean, yes, we got some new runes and we got some adjustments to runes, updated runes, revamped runes, etc, etc. But realistically, all of that stuff needed to happen anyway, and I don't feel like the power that Exorcism actually gave, I mean, it literally created an entire playstyle, hasn't been put back into the Paladin toolkit. The Horn of Lordaeron rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune called Hallowed Ground. Your consecration now heals party members within the area for 200% of the damage it deals to your enemies. Now this is a good rune. This gives Holy Paladin some great AoE healing, and it's also going to be so good for solo content. I've been using it on the PTR, and honestly, like, you can kind of solo stuff. It's like you don't even need a healer half of the time. You're healing yourself so much when you're tanking mobs, it's great. So I can't wait to really use this in a solo scenario in Phase 4 to be able to get some, you know, really good solo farms off or something like that. But in terms of the actual rune itself for raiding and stuff, it's amazing for healers. So I'm happy that Holy have finally got some stuff to do, and it gives them a bit of a nuanced playstyle as well, right? So they have to be in melee range to be able to do this because they gotta drop consecration, so it gives them a bit more of an interesting flair on the playstyle as well, I guess. And for dungeons and 5-man content, it's just going to be so good. I think they've done very well with this rune. The Aegis rune has been redesigned, now requires the readout talent to have any effect. Aegis grants 30% increased block value and now also grants readout to the Paladin on a successful melee critical strike, as well as having a 10% chance to grant readout to the Paladin when receiving a melee critical strike. So now it requires you to have readout, but it is also now not useless. The Enlightened Judgments rune has been removed and replaced with a new rune, Malleable Protection. You can now take actions during Divine Protection, and its duration is increased by 50%, but it only reduces the damage you take by 50% instead of granting full immunity. So what this rune is essentially doing is turning Divine Protection, which is the worst version of Bubble, into a shield wall version of it. Very similar to the Wrath of the Lich King version of like the Paladin shield wall, that's what this rune is going to be essentially turning that into. I think this change is quite good. I mean, Enlightened Judgments in itself was kind of useless. There weren't really much point in having it. But now having a shield wall actually can be quite good for tanks. We don't really know how hard the bosses and the mobs are going to be hitting in the raids. We know there's going to be sort of heat levels, so like heroic versions for the raids and stuff. So that could definitely make it a lot harder. The bosses hit harder. And even outside of that, there is definitely scenarios where it could be beneficial if you have a Paladin main tank to have shield wall. A scenario that really sticks out to me is like my Exnar in Naxxramas, when she stuns everyone and wraps everyone for like 8 seconds and you have to have hots on the tank and the tank just takes an absolute beating, especially if it's during like the enrage phase. Having a shield wall there is actually quite crucial, especially if you don't want your tank to die and lose his world buffs. So I do think it's a good rune. The only problem is that it competes with Sheath of Light, and tanks are still going to want Sheath of Light because they're going to want the extra spell power because it's more threat, more damage. So that's the only problem. But it could just be more of a case of like, hey guys, I need more mitigation on this boss, just give me 5 seconds before you start attacking, you know, the good old classic give the tank 5 seconds to get threat rule, you know. So I think it's a good rune and one that's probably needed if you want a Paladin to be a main tank, depending on how hard the content will be. A new baseline ability has been added from a skill book, Avenging Wrath. Increases damage and healing done by 20% for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown, causes forbearance. I really thought we was going to be getting this as a rune, so the fact that we're getting it baseline is absolutely fucking amazing. The only problem is with it is that I've noticed it's a worse version of Wings than what TBC version was, and a worse version than Wrath version. They initially said that it's 2-minute cooldown for 20% increased damage and gives you forbearance. On the PTR it's 20% increased damage for 3-minute cooldown and gives forbearance. So for context, the Burning Crusade version gave you 30% increased damage for 20 seconds with a 3-minute cooldown and gave forbearance. The Wrath of the Lich King version gave you 20% increased damage on a 2-minute cooldown with no forbearance, just a fake 30-second invisible forbearance where you couldn't use bubble. I have given this as feedback, and I also put it in like a bug report as well, just in case it was a bug and it's supposed to be 2 minutes, because they did say on the blue post it's 2-minute cooldown and 20%, whereas on the PTR in-game it's a 3-minute cooldown for 20% and gives forbearance. So although it's amazing we're getting Wings and we're getting them away from a rune, it's pretty bad that we're getting a worse version of both TBC and Wrath. So hopefully they can look into that and it was a mistake and it's supposed to be 2-minute cooldown, or if it is a 3-minute cooldown they should definitely bump it up to 30%, especially if we're getting full forbearance and we're not getting the half fake forbearance like Wrath of the Lich King. So let's take a quick look at the tier sets. Protection Paladin first, the 2 set increases the block value of your shield by 30. Not too bad, pretty useless to be totally honest. The 4 set, heal for 189 to 211, I'm assuming scales with spell power when you block. Can only heal once every few seconds. Would be absolutely fucking cracked if that didn't have a internal cooldown. But the fact that it's got 3.5 second cooldown, it's okay. It's not very good to be totally honest. The 6 set, Holy Shield no longer has charges and instead always lasts its full duration. In addition, its damage is increased by 200% of your shield block value. This is fucking insane. If this goes through as it is like this will be the best set piece and the best gear you can use for boosting, solo content, and probably tanking in general. And as an AoE tank, I don't really understand how this can be beat even by future sets unless if it gets nerfed into the ground or something like that. This is actually very, very strong. Looking at the healer set, we have the 2 set, which increases the chance for your allies to trigger your Judgment of Light and Judgment of Wisdom to 100%. This is actually very good, very strong. There'll be a lot of passive healing coming back from this and mana, so this is actually a really good 2 set to be honest. The 4 set, 2% increased critical strike chance. Not bad actually, because they actually use a lot of crit, so it's not bad at all. The 6 set, whenever your Flash of Light, Holy Light, or Beacon of Light heals the target to full health, you also heal all of the party members for a certain amount, assumably scaling with spell power. This is pretty good. It gives them kind of like a Holy Light glyph type of thing from Wrath of the Lich King. Splash healing, it's very nice. Something they've always struggled with as Holy Paladins is they're very single target, so this is actually extremely nice as well. So far there's been 2 really good 6 set bonuses for both of the specs we've talked about, and now we're going to move on to Retribution. The 2 set is your Judgment of Light and Judgment of Wisdom also grant the effects of Judgment of the Crusader. Not exactly massive, but it's nice quality of life. The 4 set gives you 2% increased crit, which is also, it's decent. It's a bit boring, but it's decent. And the 6 set is your Seal of Command, Seal of Righteousness, and Seal of Martyrdom now persist for 6 seconds after you cast another seal, or until you cast a 3rd seal. Your judgments can now trigger multiple seals if active. Now right now for Retribution Paladins, this is a lot of controversy, especially in the Paladin Discord that I'm reading. Some people love it, some people hate it. Most people just think it's a gimmicky version of twisting, but honestly I think this could be very strong, especially if you get the 0.4 second delay on your 3rd seal, which means technically you can twist 3 seals. It doesn't say that, but it also doesn't not say that. It's something where we're going to have to wait and see if it's the case. If it is the case, then it's going to be fucking insane, because we can then twist 3 seals and you will have multiple seals proccing off of multiple seals. And on top of that, we can already sort of twist judgment as it is right now on the PTR, so you can actually get 2 judgments out. If that's the case, you can also then twist 3 judgments, which would be like crazy burst. You'd be doing stupid damage in PvP. So with this one, it's just a bit of a question mark. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? We're going to have to really wait and see. And then there's some things we did not get and I wish we did get, and we probably do still need, such as we still didn't get a gap closer or a real meaningful slow outside of a clunky weapon swap macro with Avenger's Shield, which let's not forget takes a rune slot also. And I know there's always an argument for why don't you just use pots, or you could use engineering, there's stuff in the game so you can combat this and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, everyone else also has the ability to use that stuff and has a gap closer and a slow. I mean look, I'm not saying give us death grip like warriors have gotten, or I'm not even asking for a charge or an intercept, just a little bit of movement speed, that's all we needed. We still have got no dispel protection. Wings can be dispelled, seals could really do with some dispel protection. Having the ability to have our seals constantly purged or dispelled away from us just makes us feel so useless. I just wish we had some sort of dispel prevention, or at least a high resistance to dispel on seals or something like that. Would have also been nice to get some sort of style of expertise if we're going into a twisting playstyle meta, just because you're too much all or nothing. Without expertise, you could literally do next to no DPS for 10 plus seconds if you're unlucky. I don't know how that would have been implemented, but I do feel they should have probably done something, especially with them giving you extra seals on the tier set bonus as well. Because even if you didn't want to twist and you wasn't about that playstyle, you're still going to be going for that 6 set bonus. And that 6 set bonus is still going to suffer from the same issues as if you were a twister. But with that, that's about going to wrap it up. Let me know what you think to the Paladin changes down below as well, and any points you want to add on to any of the points I've made here, or anything that you disagree with or agree with what you think about Paladin in general as well.